So today's video, when it comes out, because this laptop seems to be taking more and more time to do the editing, and I know if a video goes live later than 7:30, it never seems to get the same circulation for some reason as if it goes live between 7 and 7:30. Today's video is the Royal Navy College, Britannia, an ongoing evolution of naval education. And for those who saw the post yesterday, which is why this video didn't come up yesterday, you will know that I had a poodle. You want to say hello to everyone? No, he's going to stay in his snoozing, so I'll just put the video down, at the angle down a bit. There you go, he's popped up a bit. A poodle who was at the vet's, who's now recovering from his operation and enjoying life as much as he ever does. And trust me, he does enjoy his life quite a bit, don't you, Big Fluff? You do. I think you came because you heard me talking to the screen and decided it's PT time. Yes. There's no one... We're not live. There's no one here to say PT, but okay. Because you're still getting over your very laborious surgery. He had his ears cleaned out. Yes, he's got some biscuits. But no, he is better today, and so, yes, I thought I'd put that at the beginning because I know there are quite a few people who commented and worried on the post. So today's topic is the Royal Navy College, Britannia. Now, the thing is, usually when people go and look at the building, they see this massive old building and they go, that's it, that's the history. And actually that building's only been in use since 1905. That building's relatively recent in the course of naval education. And realistically, naval education comes about for three things. One, there are fewer wars. This might sound strange, but the ongoing wars and the fighting at sea had provided ample opportunity for doing an ad hoc training program on every single ship at sea. You had a distributed training mechanism. But when you have fewer and fewer people who are actually veterans who can pass on that experience, you need to come up with an institutional way of preserving institutional memory. So previously you relied on all the different ships training up midshipmen, sometimes young sort of sailors, to midshipmen, and then them going through lieutenant's exams, and basically the Admiralty only took any notice on them once they passed the lieutenant's exam. Once they pass their exams and were a lieutenant, the Admiralty cares about you. Prior to you having your lieutenant's exam, the Admiralty doesn't really give a flying hoot. You're filling a hole on a ship. You're being trained by captains, we'll leave that to be. However, as you go through the 19th century, you start to find two disturbing problems. One, as I said, you have less and less wars, so you're not getting that combat training. And two, it's starting to transition the technology. You start to need your officers to have certain standards of education and not rely on them getting the learning on ship, but actually make sure they have it learnt to a common level of capability, because you're now moving people around between different ships far more. Instead of a captain going from ship to ship and taking his entourage of midshipmen, etc., with him, those people are sort of who is personal following with him, it's now becoming more and more common that a captain might take a couple people with him, but, you know, broadly speaking, they are supposed to be appointed centrally. And with the Admiralty now having to take more responsibility for those people centrally, they therefore have to make sure that they are living up to that responsibility, because otherwise they're going to look bad. And this is where the development of naval education really starts to come along. And this is one of the reasons why it's about the 1860s when things really start to go massively. And Britannia herself, well, she's the first choice of what's available. Now, this is not to say that prior to 1859, and well, 1863, honestly, but prior to that point, there hadn't been any naval academy, any training. In fact, there had been a school at Portsmouth up until 1837. But the thing is, and this is the real problem of the matter, The Portsmouth School had been a very small proportion of the intake. When I show you a picture of it, you're going to look at it and go, Alex, that looks about the size of a UK primary school from that era. In fact, it is roughly the size of a primary school I can think of from that era, and a few others. It was a very small percentage of young personnel went for it. In fact, and there was really very little discernible advantage to going through it for your career prospects. In fact, one could argue that the increased time with senior officers, that of being a midshipman on a flagship, etc., was far better for your career prospects in terms of the contacts you make. But as the Royal Navy realised, the world was changing. Technology was changing, and what they were dealing with was changing. So they needed to change with it. And they're luckily at this point, they have quite a few of these rather large, rather well-built ships and barely used wandering around. Caledonia class are a good example of them. They are 120-gun first-rate ships of the line. They are 40-odd years old in terms of hull term at this point, but in terms of active use, they spent most of their careers laid up in ordinary, not in commission. And so their hulls are fairly good nick. She's turned into a cadet training ship in 1859, but she's sitting in Portsmouth, and frankly, there ain't much space there. So the Royal Navy looks down the coast, and they find in the River Dart, they find this wonderful space where they can moor some ships. And they can do all they need to do without having the problems of Portsmouth, i.e., you're in a major naval base. And that's where she's put. And she literally takes her first students, her first personnel aboard, as soon as she's down there. As soon as in terms of 1863, she gets her first batch of cadets. The thing is, though, the Royal Navy grossly underestimates just how much space they'll need for these kids. Just how much space. They're giving them educations in maths and mathematics, sailing technique, ship handling technique, engineering a little bit, quite a lot of history. They're trying to give them a well-grounded naval education, but they don't have enough space. So the very next year, HMS Hindustan, which is a far newer vessel, 20 years old, second-rate ship of the line, 80-gun vessel, broadly speaking, second-rate, could arguably be considered a third rate, but there's a debate over the time and space, especially the weight of the gun, so we'll go with second rate. She joined training in 1865. Basically, 1864, 1863, they are starting to get overwhelmed, so they bring her over in 1865. And she's an extension. And they need her. They need her for this. They need her to provide the necessary space to expand their teaching facilities, the necessary space to expand their accommodation facilities, and most importantly, they need her to to provide the necessary space for training them in the art of ship control. Okay? And that's down to communication. And spreading things around so you can actually be simulating real communication issues becomes an issue. They do this. They do this. Excuse me a second. That's better. And with this work, with them expanding the accommodations, one of the things they find is that, well, to be honest, the Britannia wasn't in as good a condition as they'd hoped she would be. So in 1869, the very remarkably new HMS Prince of Wales, which was a 120-gun first rate, but please note when she's launched, same year as something else, which might explain why within 9 years she is very much no longer in demand. And there might be a clue in this picture as to what replaced her, in her value, was renamed Britannia, and would serve in the role till 1905. And this is actually a picture of Britannia as she was by that point, and Hindustan. And as you can see, one of them has had the accommodations moved quite heavily aboard her. You can see from the way she's been done. The other one's taken on more of the training role. And in fact, one of the reasons you have this split up is to try and make things work properly, and you've set up a connection between them. But this is how the Royal Navy likes to use its old ships aligned. This is how the Royal Navy likes to make use of these facilities. And they are teaching a fairly heavy course for the time. It's a fairly practical course, but it is definitely one of the harder courses that are taught in the world at this point. And it's all about preparing these officers so when they join the fleet, they can adapt to the world that's changing in front of them. It doesn't make it perfect. Please note. One of the things you find about naval education when you start realizing, especially leadership education, is an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing process. And a lot of this role is about turning out good junior officers who are going to have the right information that when given an instruction by their senior officer can go and lead a task. Not accomplish it solo. They won't have that knowledge. They'll have to lean on their senior rates, the older personnel around them, but can go and accomplish a task. For a given problem, they can go and accomplish it. If you ask them to go and communicate with another ship, they will have the information of what they should be doing, what they should be thinking about. If you ask them to take a boat crew out, they know that. They have to have a tremendously large rounding in terms of their knowledge. And that's realistically what this is going for. This is all about creating a knowledge base for the formation and for the force. In many ways, the leadership skills being past these personnel, past these trainees, is almost implicit. It's in who the personnel are assigned to teach them. What they are assigned to teach. And I would say it's wonderfully ad hoc in many ways. It is wonderfully ad hoc because, again, one of the interesting things people sometimes forget when we're talking about the stuff today, when we're talking about professional military education or professional career development, we have a tremendous advantage in that there has been a lot of examples of that for us to draw from. Maybe not in our own field, maybe not in our own area because it might be that new, but in similar fields, in similar areas, or areas which provide us lessons, we can go and look at them. A good example that's often used today is that fact that the medical, I don't want to say industry, but the medical community draws a lot of information from airline pilots. And from the methodologies they use of commanding in cockpits, and how they manage situations. And for good or for ill, that's been incredibly helpful. There's also an argument as to whether it's gone too far or not far enough, but that's for the medical community to resolve and develop itself. And this is the point. You have these examples to draw from. What we're talking about in the 1860s, the 1870s, the 1880s, the 1890s, is they are developing this from scratch. They're developing a program from scratch. And believe it or not, one of the interesting things is the transition from these vessels, from these hulls, to an actual building causes to come about a massive transition period. Because they need to transition not just from the ships to a physical college ashore, but to transition from one way of doing things and approaching the training to another. And as they have developed and evolved what is required from the training, it just keeps growing. With that being said, we reached the shameless book plug point, and I will just do a quick transition, because if I change from this mic to this mic, which is behind the camera, behind the computer. This is the poor laptop at the moment and how it's suffering, and this is after I have cleaned out everything in it. So that being said, I want to say thank you to everyone who supported me and supports this channel. You really do help this channel be everything it is. You really do help me keep on doing this stuff and keeping the lights on. In terms of being able to manage my finances so I can work enough to pay my bills and then use the money from this channel to support the research and the ongoing developing of it. So, thank you, and support what's coming out historically. There are books supposed to be coming out soon, more books, but as you can guess, they're not going to be finished off on this laptop. They're really not. They are going to be finished off on the PC, which means I'm going to have to set up the software again and get everything happy with it, but when the new PC is built. And I'm hoping very much to have put together all the money by Friday, because I should be have received all my paychecks by then. And hopefully then from Friday some point I'll be able to make the order for the new stuff. Hopefully Amazon, most of it seems to be able to be delivered in about 1 day, and maybe it comes Saturday, maybe it doesn't, but hopefully Brewship Sunday is the last time I have to use this laptop for a live and a video. If all the stuff arrives on Saturday, you'll be getting the new computer on Saturday. But we'll see. I'm hoping it can be done quickly, because whilst I'd like to use this opportunity to shamelessly plug my book, to say thank you to all of you for your support, for liking, sharing, subscribing, for all the things you do to support channels, for the Ko-fis, the super chats, super thanks, the Patreon memberships, and Patreon vote is live now as we speak. For June and July 2025, the Patreon vote is live. Top 8 get made into videos. That's 4 lives and long patrols and 4 premieres. Well, as it normally turns out, about pretty much 8 premieres, because I found that if I put out what I would consider comparable videos, and one as a long patrol and one as a premiere, the premiere will go on to roughly twice as many views in the first 24 hours, which is the critical thing for YouTube to decide how it promotes it in the algorithm, versus the other one. The other one might do better eventually, but I'll be about a few dozen cycles down the road, by which point it seems to be the amount of money it gets for ads per ad strangely drops, but I'm not sure why that is. Someday I will understand the YouTube logarithm, sometimes I will understand someday I'll understand the ad metric, but what I do know is that I want to reach as many people in this naval history as I possibly can. And that's what I'm doing this for. And I want to share that passion and share that love for naval history. I also want to get back to doing some gaming streams occasionally on Twitch, because I enjoy doing those. Answering the random questions that come in while I'm playing the games, and chatting about how the games and how the naval stuff works. People sometimes ask me why I do some sci-fi videos on this channel, and I go, well, I do computer game ones on Twitch as well, and to be honest, that's the sort of link between the two in my mind. In my mind, how does this whole beautiful thing come together in terms of one approach to doing all this naval history and trying to get as many people interested in naval history as possible? How does it work? As one is when you start thinking about how these things link. If I can apply the same lessons of naval history and learning naval history and studying naval history and how you understand naval history leadership to a science fiction show, that will get some people interested in naval history who might not be interested in it otherwise, because they'll come in and start thinking about their own science fiction love and start looking at it. And it's the same with the computer games. And that's the thing, I want to draw people into naval history. Some are trying to spread their message by blah appeal. Some by, I don't know, looking very healthy on screen. Others are able to spread it by sheer power of their voice being quite so compelling to listen to. And combined with a lot of effort and a lot of research, it really does such a good job. Others of us, it's got to be the energy we bring to the screen. And the variety of topics we're prepared to discuss. Because that's how we're going to draw people in. We each have our own skill set. That's mine. I think. Broadly speaking. So, thank you for your support. Thank you for making it possible. And thank you to everyone who has supported the new computer and has sent me some things to support that. It really has made a tremendous difference. It truly has. I was working out when I would have been able to probably afford it without your support and without the stuff that's come in, and it would probably have been at the end of next month if I was lucky and if I hadn't had another major upset at that time, and someone, and I won't name who, hadn't had to have any more rather interesting surgeries, because whilst they do get paid for on insurance, please note we do have insurance for our dogs, you have to pay first and then the money comes back from the insurance. They don't realise how expensive they are. They really don't. They never question our love for them if they realise that. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for making everything possible, and thank you for all your support. Can't ever say how much it means. Now, some of the most interesting opposition which comes to the building of this building, to the creation of this college like this, comes from those officers who fundamentally believe that if you're not doing the training, living and breathing aboard a ship, even if it's anchored permanently in a river mouth, in an estuary space, you are not properly understanding the sea. And there is huge debate about this. It's honestly a very real scenario which comes out of that particular history, where you would still have naval training to this day based in ships anchored in Dartmouth. You would not have brought them ashore. And we can think about that and go, that would have been problematic. It would have been. But that was the idea of tradition. The argument was made about it being important for them to get their sea legs, for them to develop themselves. There was actually a strong debate made against the Dartmouth College. But the idea was, from 1903 to 1905, that the idea they would do 2 years in Osborne Naval College, and then 2 years at Dartmouth. They get that experience. Again, why is that necessary? Well, because rather like the Royal Navy had tended to employ what they called schoolies, or educational masters, on various ships during the age of sail, when they'd done the training aboard ships midshipmen, the Royal Navy was finding the education quality, if they were limiting themselves to just the personnel, people who could read and write, they had a very small pool, a very, very small pool of personnel they could recruit their officers from. And you need to expand your Navy, not just in peacetime, but also be able to potentially expand in wartime. This means you need to have as large a pool as possible. And if you have the fact that you can't get enough people who have the required level of education attainment, they need to find a way to educate them to that level. So to that extent, you can almost start seeing Osborne becoming as what I would call the primary education facility, and Dartmouth becoming the naval education facility. Okay? That's very broad stroke analysis of them. Please note, if you go into the specifics of their individual core structures and what they're teaching, there is naval throughout them, and there is education throughout them. I would just argue that Osborne becomes about, okay, oh, good lord, yes. Cadet Smith, yes. Right, yes. Can't write for a toffee, nope. Can he do his sums? Potentially, but we can't read them. Oh, great. So in other words, we need to train him how to write. Okay, alright, carry on. That is the scenario you've got dealing at Osborne House. And in Osborne. By the time they get to Dartmouth, they should be able to write legibly. So that's the point at which you start asking, so Cadet Smith, he's good, but what's his leadership capabilities? Is he a future leader? Is he someone we think is going to be on the torpedo track or the gunnery track? What do we think? Do you think he should go to maybe an engineering school? For engineering training? The latter one is something I've sort of added in, because there are times when that's a possibility, and there's times when that's really not, and there's times when they combine together, and times when they're kept far apart. It's a joyous piece of history. But even with the transition agreed, and them going to set up in this beautiful building, designed by Sir Aston Webb, built by Higgs and Hill and completed in 1905. Well, they start the transition. Lord Tweedmouth, the First Sea Lord at the time, has to work things out. The Britannia training establishment was closed at the same time. The cadets under instruction were embarked on 2 cruisers to complete their program under the old system. Okay? Just think about that. The Royal Navy can't afford to stop recruitment of cadets for 2 years. Just think of the issue there, of course. So, no. What they have to do is they have to have some people completing under the old system. The headquarters of the cruisers was established at Bermuda, where suitable arrangements had been made to house the cadets. The cadets entered in September on the old system, and those entered in January 1906, the last to be so entered, were received at the Royal Navy College, Dartmouth, where they were instructed as far as possible side by side with the cadets transferred from Osborne. It was complicated, but they did it. They worked it out. They sent some cruisers off to Bermuda. Some of them got a very nice holiday. Maybe even their first suntan. And also, to an extent, satisfied those who were worried about the sea training being lost now they were in these big buildings. Now, I would say, if you consider recent Ofsted reports, etc., on Dartmouth, you will know it's not in the greatest condition. Because one of the things that seems to be a constant throughout the British Armed Forces is whenever governments are trying to cut defence spending, or cut it in a way that doesn't proclaim they're cutting it, the things that get forgotten are things like infrastructure maintenance, including of education facilities. Because it's still usable, so we can put off any upgrades and modernisations. And basically until it gets to the point at which it's going to be a multi-billion-pound project to either do it all up because you decide you want to keep that piece of infrastructure working, or it's a tear down and build a new one job somewhere else. I'm sorry for adding a little bit of politics into the discussion, but it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile putting those recent Ofsted reports, which are, if you start looking at this, will probably come up in your newsfeed, in context. Yes, the quality of the education was not critiqued. The quality of the accommodation was. And rightfully so. I'd also say that I have been, for the last few years, an ardent collector of books being sold off from various British military education sites, including Britannia, books being sold off by their libraries. I tend to, whenever they come up, I tend to manage to grab them. I have managed to grab a few over the years from different libraries, and they are useful. They're very good books, usually. But usually they're being got rid of because they just don't need as many copies anymore, or because for that particular topic, whilst it's still useful to me, it's not useful to officers considering the future. Potentially. I'm being charitable. The other part of it is saying that they're selling it off because they just don't have the space to store it all. But, you know, that's the less charitable part of me. Less charitable. And the other academies who are part of this programme. We've already talked about the Royal Navy Academy, Portsmouth, 1733 to 1837. There you go, that lovely little 3-storey building. And the Royal Navy College at Greenwich. I mentioned Osborne a few times. There's also the Royal Navy Engineering College in Keyham College, Plymouth, 1880 to 1995. This is a picture of their education there. So that comes on long after Britannia has been established, but long before Britannia is a physical building. Same with Greenwich. Greenwich was originally, of course, a hospital, and then it was turned into a naval college. Greenwich becomes, as said, the higher education centre. There's also various things established in Portsmouth, as I've talked about before, which are looking at the future and presence of war. And one of the things you have to remember is, whilst the Royal Navy doesn't have a staff organisation and doesn't establish it like the Army as soon as it is, the Royal Naval Intelligence Division, which is one of the oldest organisations of its type, had long assumed the role through dint of effort of its commanders, but also by expediency of a lot of those criteria. Coming up with operational plans, fleshing out information, had long been passed on to them, needing staff trained officers. However, because it was an intelligence division, the Royal Navy liked to keep its work of it to itself, rather than giving it to the wider government. This is the difference between having a general staff and having an intelligence division. The intelligence division should be part of your staff. It's not a replacement for it. Because they do different jobs. One is providing the information about what's going on in the world and can fulfill some of the functions of planning, etc., because it has the information available. But it's never going to be responsible for doing public briefings and giving documents to people who it considers at best loose lips, at worst active security threats. Its very nature of being an intelligence division works against it. But still, these things are working together to provide some professional military education, some professional naval education, and their development. And you go to them at different phases in their career, along with other schools. The engineering school, but you also have the torpedo school. You have all these facilities which come through. Now, having these centers, having these sites, useful. But it's also a key thing that with armed forces you will often see. They have committees when they are investigating something. Once they decide if it's useful, then they'll have a school. And they'll start sending people there to train in it and think about it. So the thing is, by actually setting up these academies, and setting up these schools, and professionalizing the process of people going through them, they have actually shown that the Navy is valuing education. It's valuing the ability of education to teach its officers how to be better officers. And often that comes down to giving them the information and the understanding of what has happened before, so they can make better decisions now. See, there is a difference between learning by rote. You do this in X situation, you do Y. Okay? That works for certain things. But for leadership, usually you need to know you do a Y in X situation because of Z. So if you find yourself in a situation which looks like X, but Z's not a factor, then you consider quickly, hang on, is Y the sensible solution here? And that's the thing, that's critical thinking, that's a key part of leadership. Not learning to make these decisions off rote, but learning to make these decisions based on the information you have available. So learning what information is pertinent to that debate, to that discussion. What do you need to look for? It all comes in. And from there we get to the present day, where you can see there have been additions. There have been additions to Dartmouth. There is still that beautiful, grandiose building, as designed by Sir Aston Webb and built by Higgs and Hill. There are other buildings on the site behind it. There have been developments. More space was needed. And that's the reality. If you'd kept with just trying to run things off ships, you'd have either ended up with a fleet parked in Dartmouth Estuary, or you'd have ended up having to build a shore anyway. It is a beautiful locale to visit. It truly is. And it's a beautiful building with a lot of history. But it's hard as the last big beating heart of pure naval education in the United Kingdom for officers. It's kind of sad. Yes, there are other schools which are part of their ongoing development and training and specialization as their career goes on, but in terms of naval education from joining the service to being an officer, Britannia is it. And there have been years where it hasn't had its name because there have been battleships named Britannia or a royal yacht named Britannia, and there have been other names used at the point, but Britannia is what we can call it. These days, of course, you have a national education system. You have all sorts of schools up and down the country teaching people how to read and write and do maths and science and all sorts of other things. And that's kind of helpful because that's kind of eliminated the need for preparatory training. In that you are not taking people from such a wide background now. You can assume a certain level of basic knowledge. And you can assume that further by enforcing standards of education attainment before they actually get there. And that does give you options. It does also narrow down your pool again you can recruit from, because it's going to be the people who are volunteer, who want to come there, want to serve, and who also attain these educational requirements. But it also simplifies things in terms of actual teaching, because modern naval warfare is so much about communication, it's obscene. It always has been. But we're talking about written communication, we're talking about understanding text on a screen and being able to respond to it. We're talking about being able to take in thick binders full of information. Yes, sometimes those are virtual binders, but trust me, they are still equally dense. They really are. And what's fun to me is that all this was developed pretty much from scratch. Yes, the modern system does tend to look outside the military, to look at other scenarios of education, to try and grow, look at other militaries, other armed forces around the world and how they're carrying out education, to try and develop it, and it does a good job of this, because the thing about education in any scenario is it's a constant evolution of source material, of medium, and of how we approach it. One of the things I really liked, and I will say this is me, is delivering lectures by video. Let me explain. My view has always been for universities, seminars are best when in person. But I've always felt lectures should be recorded. Because whilst it's good for students to attend lectures, and there is a modicum of value in the fact that they've been able to turn up on time, take notes, learn, and structure their time accordingly, there's also got to be a reality and understanding that people learn in different ways, that some people need to work as well, and some people have childcare or have family commitments or problems, and so can't attend all the lectures. I often felt lectures should be optional, seminars should be mandatory. And seminars, by the way, are usually when you have the small groups of roughly 20, 30 students, sometimes in the teens, in terms of numbers, and they sit around and they're discussing the topic. Those should be mandatory. They are when you can have presentations, when the students can deliver presentations, when they can show their learning, when you can interact with them. But when you've got hundreds in a lecture theatre, there are advantages to being there. There's a sudden frisson, a sudden energy. And there is always the opportunity to come and ask lecturer questions straight afterwards. But I've always felt that actually those lectures being recorded and being available online to the students should be a perfectly natural thing. So if students can't make it for some reason, if they have something else in life, they do not lose the opportunity for that lecture. That's part of the reason why I love doing YouTube. Yes, I treat the lives like I do seminars, which is why I interact with the chat the way I do and answer the questions, and I know some people find that disconcerting, But that is almost sort of a treating those lives as a seminar. The recorded videos I treat as a lecture. I try and make it a story, a narrative, so you stay and follow it through, with occasionally a little bit of winding tales added in, but that's the methodology I was taught as a lecturer. And it works. Most of the time. For most of the students. Not all the time, and not for all the students. Everyone is an individual. And that's the point. We all learn, we're all sort of more individuals. And if you want to make your pool of education, of being able to provide people with the information so they can make their own informed decisions as wide as possible, you need to find a way to reach them. With that being said, and considering the evolution we've talked about today, how this school came to be, it was quite simply, it was a response to the problems they were having at the time with maintaining that knowledge and having increasing responsibility for retaining that knowledge, and so deciding to go on a centralized institutional approach to maintaining institutional memory so they could continue to be an effective naval force, both peace and war. If you were doing this today, if you were setting up a naval academy, you had to set up a navy from scratch and set up a naval academy from scratch, how would you approach it? What would you do? Would you want to go for a centralized center like this, or would you want to go for a more distributed model? What would you be looking at? What kind of educational system would you think suits the modern world best when it comes to these systems? And please note, I don't think necessarily chips and downloading stuff straight into people's minds is A, not really an option at the moment, and B, not really a sensible option. Because that sounds to me like a very good way to get people information. It doesn't necessarily sound like a good way to be sure they understand that information and can think critically about it and can use that information. That is the problems I have with that as a methodology. I think it's a very good way, potentially, of getting information directly into people's brains. But the other criteria of an education system, being able to think critically about it, being able to understand that information, being able to use that information to make decisions, that doesn't work out that way. Let's be honest, we can all download a computer game onto our computer, or another Apple software onto our computer. That doesn't mean we can use it. We have the information there, we have the thing there, so we need to learn how to use it. That's the problem. Now, what else have we got coming up? I knew this was not going to be a particularly long video because I've talked about Britannia in so many different videos over the years. This was me bringing together a bit of the history. Well, what I've got next is Emperor Pertinax, which I'm looking forward to, the Admiral Emperor. And I want to say again, thank you. I hope very much by the time I'm recording Pertinax, I have the computer, I have managed to get the money together, and I've managed to order the bits and have built the new computer. So that everything will be working properly on the PC, and then I will have to bump up ahead of certain things for the car and certain other things, probably the laptop, because this poor laptop probably needs to have reached the new state of evolution before we go to Japan. Either that, or I've had to find something else to fill its role, because the whole thing is... I hadn't realised using it for a couple of weeks a year that it had got, for light duties on basically off-running education centres, it had got quite this bad. I might try installing new RAM and see if that helps it, because it's only got a teeny amount of RAM. It's only got 4 gigabytes of RAM. And probably, well, when I say 4 gigabytes, it's got 4 gigabytes of, it's got 8 gigabyte RAM stick, which is divided into 4 gigabytes, which are considered good, and 3.78 gigabytes, which are considered viable. So technically it's got 8 gigabytes of RAM, so it's technically not terrible, but it's got its slot could take more, and I could put in a bigger memory, RAM slot in it, and that might help it a lot. That might. We'll see. That might be my first option before trying to buy something new. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Toodles. Oh, and before anyone does suggest new laptops, which I might want to consider, I know what I would really love for my next laptop. I would love a framework laptop. I keep looking at them and thinking, I love that idea. It's a laptop which I can treat like my PC, and I can take apart and rebuild when I need to, and not worry about warranties. I love that idea. Just not sure whether that's financially a viable option for me at any point in the near future. Sad enough. Anyway, suggestions, welcome, but it's fair that before you make the suggestions, you know where my heart lies. Thank you very much, and take care.